In the markets, you're having Brent slide over 1%. That's after a report that the U.S. is said to have asked OPEC to hike its output by 1 million barrels a day. Joining us now from London is Stuart Wallace, Bloomberg News executive editor for energy and commodities. Tell me how this might have gone down, Stuart.
Well, we already knew from Mnuchin that he'd been talking to allies that had spare production capacity. And when you look around the world and you think, who's a US ally and who has significant amounts of spare production capacity, it's a pretty short list. And that we already knew. We also obviously saw the tweet from Trump talking about how OPEC was manipulating the oil price and how it needed to change. So what this does is adds a little bit of flesh to those conversations and the kind of numbers that they're talking about. Now, no one is suggesting that the US is somehow threatening OPEC to increase by this amount or there will be consequences. But it gives some sense of the scale of what they're facing. And really, it's looking at the Iran sanctions. The last time those sanctions went on, we lost about 1 million barrels plus out the market. If you want to keep a steady oil price, which clearly, as retail gasoline gets up to $3 a gallon, is exactly what you want to do, then you need to find 1 million barrels from somewhere else to keep that stable.
So, to be clear, President Trump, in essence, reinstates sanctions on Iran and then calls to OPEC to make up the loss we might see from the Iranian sanctions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure it's necessarily that simplistic. Obviously, there's lots of other conversations going on here, and it is a complex issue because it's not just OPEC at the moment. It's OPEC plus, and the key player in that is Russia. Clearly there are other issues going on in the political sphere. It's not just about oil. But we're going into an OPEC meeting in a couple of weeks from now that is going to be pretty lively, whatever happens, because they're trying to square a pretty difficult problem. You've got Russia on one side, you've got Iran on the other, you've got OPEC producers, some of whom can't increase output, some of whom can, all of whom need higher oil prices. It's going to be very hard to see what is the compromise position.
It's interesting because the feeling is that Russia wants also a 1 million barrel a day increase in production, and the Saudis want like 300,000 barrels a day. So does this put a U.S., Russia versus maybe Saudi Arabia conversation on the table?
Yeah, I mean, again, I would not necessarily put the US and Russia on the same side. I mean, maybe on this particular point, they're not that far apart. But I think Russia's position is, look, they had a deal. That deal has probably more or less achieved what it set out to do, which is to get rid of a lot of the glut that was in the global market. And by and large, Russia has never really acted like OPEC. This is a very unusual time where they're working together. So we shouldn't necessarily expect that sort of deal to continue forever. So from that point of view, yes, I guess Russia probably is closer to the US side. For OPEC itself, I mean, they're looking at their budget deficits and saying we really would like higher prices. On the other hand, there are political considerations here in terms of the dynamic between the Gulf Arabs and Iran and what's happening there at the moment. They need the US on side.